Praise ye the Lord. O give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth for ever. Who can utter the mighty acts of the Lord? Who can shew forth all his praise? Blessed are they that keep judgment, and he that doeth righteousness at all times. Remember me, O Lord, with the favour that thou bearest unto thy people. O visit me with thy salvation, that I may see the good of thy chosen, that I may rejoice in the gladness of thy nation, that I may glory with thine inheritance. A prayer for God to deliver the nation of Israel, us, verse 47, is hardly a theme for David to harp on, even before he is a king. Israel wasn't captives among the heathen, verses 46 and 47, until the times of Sennacherib and Salmaneser, 2 Kings chapter 17 to 18. This is the first in a small collection of Hallelujah psalms, the others being Psalms 111, 112, 113, 135, 146, 147, 148, 149, and 150. 8 of those psalms end with Praise ye the Lord. Verse 1 is very much self-explanatory. Verse 2, no one can utter all of the mighty acts of the Lord, because no one has ever seen 1/10 of them. John said that if you wrote down just what Jesus did in one lifetime, the world couldn't contain the record of it. John chapter 21, verse 25. Who among us can describe what took place in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1? Or for that matter, Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. Who among us has seen the glory that God gave Jesus Christ before the foundation of the world? John chapter 17, verse 25. It's God who sends hurricanes, typhoons, floods, earthquakes, tornadoes, droughts, and monsoons, and all kinds of tragedies and accidents, if the material in Psalms 147 and 148 is correct. Do you realize how impossible these things are to utter? They are so unutterable, that intellectuals throw in the towel and insist that there can't be any God, because nothing can be explained when it comes to death, handicaps, tragedy, pain, and sorrow. The intellectuals have nothing to offer. If those of us who believe the book cannot utter the mighty acts of the Lord, could some lame-brained, self-righteous, like Albert Einstein, Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Bernard Russell, William Glasser, or the leaders of the National Education Association ever utter them? No way. Again, if the heavenly host in God's very presence, Revelation chapter 4, verse 8, cannot shew forth all his praise, who down here can do it? Observe the legal character of Old Testament salvation and in the tribulation under faith and works, given clearly in verse 3. It's the salvation of Romans chapter 2, verses 6 and 7, not Romans 10, chapter 9 to 13. O visit me with thy salvation, verse 4, is not the salvation that comes by grace through faith. It's a salvation that comes through keeping the judgments, verse 3, the covenant, Psalm chapter 25, verse 10, and chapter 44, verse 17, chapter 78, verse 10, and verse 37. And the commandments, Psalm chapter 78, verse 7, 103, verse 18, chapter 111, verse 10, Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, chapter 14, verse 12, and chapter 22, verse 14. But who is this I and me of verses 4 and 5? Why, don't you know? It's someone from Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 43. rejoicing in the restoration of Israel during the millennium. Some chapters and verses are for it. Psalm 68, verse 3, Psalm 70, verse 4, Psalm 97, verse 1, Psalm 98, verse 4, Isaiah chapter 65, verse 18, 66, verse 10, 61, verse 11, Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 17, and chapter 4, verse 2, etc. Whoever wrote the psalm collated 2 verses from some convert to Judaism in the captivity. In view of Daniel chapter 4, verses 34 to 35, Esther chapter 10, verses 2 and 3, and Ezra chapter 6, verses 8 to 12, this interpretation moves beyond the realm of conjecture. It's sound scriptural application. When the dying thieves prays, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom, Luke chapter 23, verse 42, he is not speaking as one of God's chosen people, Israel, to whom the kingdom belonged. He is speaking as that crowd in Matthew chapter 8, verses 11 to 12, who had no part in the kingdom, but got it in on it anyway. We have sinned with our fathers. We have committed iniquity. We have done wickedly. Our fathers understood not thy wonders in Egypt. They remembered not the multitude of thy mercies, but provoked him at the sea, even at the Red Sea. Nevertheless he saved them for his name's sake, that he might make his mighty power to be known. He rebuked the Red Sea also, and it was dried up. So he led them through the depths as through the wilderness. And he saved them from the hand of him that hated them, and redeemed them from the hand of the enemy. And the waters covered their enemies. There was not one of them left. Then believed they his words. They sung his praise. Now you can be historical. We have sinned with our fathers. We have committed iniquity. We have done wickedly, verse 6. Now he's speaking for Israel, but certainly not in verses 4 and 5. The fathers of verse 6 are true Israelites, related to the author of the psalm. They provoked him at the sea, even at the Red Sea. The reference is to the first wail of woe recorded right on the shores of the Red Sea in Exodus chapter 14, verses 11 and 12. The commentators have often confused the provoking of God in verse 7 with the provoking of Moses in verse 33. Then believed they his works, verse 12, takes place in Exodus chapter 14, verse 31, when Israel sees what happened to Pharaoh and his troops. The first song recorded as such in the Bible is recorded on that occasion, Exodus chapter 15, verse 1. So we read, they sang his praise.